paper trails. Tonight, the rest of the world is asleep, wrapped in the cold silence of the night. But for us, the day begins. We travel to the year 1912, stepping into the warm, flour-dusted air of a village bakery. Here, amidst the glow of the wood-fired oven and the scent of rising dough, we find comfort in the simplest of tasks. November 4th, 1912, 3 a.m. The village streets are pitch black and silent. My breath clouds in the cold air as I fumble for the iron key. Click, clack. The heavy wooden door swings open and I step inside. The bakery smells faintly of yesterday's vanilla and toasted grain. It is a welcoming scent. I struck a match, and lit the oil lamp hanging by the door. A soft amber light pushed back the shadows, revealing the large wooden work table in the center of the room. It is scarred and worn smooth from years of use, dusted with a fine layer of white flour like snow. I am alone, and the bakery is mine. November 5th, 1912. The first task is always the fire. The heart of the bakery is the massive brick oven built into the back wall. It is still faintly warm from yesterday. I opened the iron door, creak, and arranged the dry logs inside. Birch for heat, oak for longevity. I tucked a piece of paper underneath and lit it. The fire caught slowly. Crackle. Pop. I watched the orange flames lick up the sides of the wood. The sound of the fire is the only company I need. As the heat began to radiate outward, warming the chilly room, I took off my heavy coat and tied on my white apron. November 6th, 1912. I began the preparation for the sourdough. I went to the pantry to fetch the flour sacks. They are heavy, made of rough burlap. I dragged a sack to the table. Thud. I untied the string and scooped the white flour into the large brass sieve. Holding the sieve over the mixing bowl, I shook it gently. Shh, shh, shh. The sound is soft, like sand falling. The flour drifted down in a fine cloud, airing out, becoming light and fluffy. It covered my hands in a ghostly white dust. I ran my fingers through the mound of flour. It felt cool and silky soft. November 7th, 1912, Thursday. The yeast must be woken up. I keep the starter in a ceramic jar covered with a damp cloth. I peeled back the cloth. The smell is sharp, tangy, and alive. It bubbles gently. Bloop, bloop. I poured warm water into a jug and dissolved a spoonful of sugar. Then I added the yeast. I whisked it slowly with a wooden fork. The water turned cloudy and beige. I let it sit for 10 minutes. Slowly, a thick foam began to rise to the surface, breathing, expanding. It is the magic of baking, creating life from dust and water. November 8th, 1912. The mixing begins. I poured the yeast water into the mountain of flour. Using my hands, I began to bring it together. It is a messy, sticky business at first. The dough clung to my fingers. I added a pinch of salt. Sprinkle. Slowly, the shaggy mess began to form a cohesive ball. I turned it out onto the wooden table. Now comes the kneading. Push, turn, fold. Push, turn, fold. My palms pressed into the dough, stretching the gluten. The rhythm is physical and steady. The table creaked slightly under the pressure. With every push, the dough became smoother, elastic, and warm under my hands. November 9th, 1912, Saturday. The dough needs to rest. I shaped the large mass into a perfect round ball. Its surface was smooth and tight like a drum. I placed it into a large earthenware bowl and covered it with a heavy linen cloth. Now we wait. This is the part of baking that cannot be rushed. I sat on a small stool near the oven, watching the fire die down to glowing embers. The heat on my face felt like the sun. The only sound in the room was the soft crackle of the wood and the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. The dough rises in silence, growing in the dark. November 10th, 1912. Sunday. The dough has risen. I lifted the linen cloth from the bowl. The mass has doubled in size, smelling sweet and fermented. Now comes the most satisfying moment. I plunged my fist gently into the center of the dough to release the air. Pff! A soft sigh escaped from the bowl as the dough collapsed. It is alive. I tipped the bowl, and the dough cascaded onto the floured table with a heavy, wet slap. It wobbled slightly, soft and pillowy. I dusted my hands with flour and patted it down gently. November 11th, 1912. I took up my metal bench scraper. It is a flat blade with a wooden handle, the baker's most trusted tool. I began to divide the large mass into individual loaves. Scrape, chop, scrape, chop. The metal blade slid across the wooden table, cutting cleanly through the soft dough. I placed each portion on the brass scales. 1 pound, 2 ounces. Precision is key. If a piece was too light, I cut a small snippet from the main mass and added it. The dough feels cool and tacky, sticking slightly to the fingers before pulling away. November 12th, 1912. Tuesday. Shaping the loaves. I took a portion of dough and flattened it with my palm. Then I began to fold it, top to center, bottom to center. I rolled it tightly against the table surface to create tension. The skin of the dough stretched smooth and tight. Roll, tuck, seal. I repeated this motion until I had 20 perfect round boules lined up on the board. They looked like pale, sleeping faces. I dusted them with semolina flour to prevent sticking. The coarse grains of semolina made a faint scratching sound against the wood. November 13th, 1912. I decided to make sweet cinnamon buns today. This requires butter, blocks of cold yellow butter. I placed the butter between 2 sheets of parchment paper and beat it with a rolling pin to soften it. Thwack, thwack, thwack. It is a loud, dull sound. Once pliable, I spread the butter over the rolled-out dough. It glided smoothly, coating the surface in a rich yellow layer. I sprinkled brown sugar and cinnamon generously. The spices hit the butter with a soft hush, turning the yellow to a deep, fragrant bronze. November 14th, 1912. Thursday. Rolling the pastry. I started at the bottom edge of the dough sheet, rolling it upwards into a tight log. The dough felt heavy and dense with the butter filling. Using a sharp knife, I sliced the log into thick spirals. Slice, slice. The knife revealed the beautiful layers inside. Dough, butter, sugar, dough. I arranged them in a large iron baking tray, leaving a little space between each for them to expand. They huddled together in the pan, waiting for the heat. November 15th, 1912. The oven is ready. I checked the temperature by throwing a handful of flour onto the oven floor. It browned instantly. Perfect heat. I picked up the long wooden peel, the baker's paddle. I slid the loaves onto the peel and then, with a quick jerk of the wrist, transferred them onto the hot brick floor of the oven. Slide, shuffle. One by one, I fed them to the fire. I closed the heavy iron door. Now the alchemy happens. The heat will turn the pale dough into golden, crusty bread. November 16th, 1912. Saturday. While the bread bakes, I cleaned the table. I used the bench scraper to remove the dried bits of dough and flour. Scrape, scrape. The sound is gritty and rhythmic. I wiped the wood with a damp cloth. The air in the bakery is changing now. The smell of raw yeast is gone, replaced by the intoxicating aroma of toasting crust and caramelizing sugar. It is the smell of hunger, the smell of home. I stood by the oven door, listening to the faint crackling sound of the crusts forming inside. November 17th, 1912. Sunday. The bread is done. I can tell by the smell, nutty and deeply toasted. I opened the oven door. A blast of dry heat hit my face. Using the wooden peel, I fished the loaves out one by one. Slide, scrape, lift. I tapped the bottom of a hot loaf with my knuckle. Thump, thump, a hollow drum-like sound. This means it is baked perfectly through. I placed them on the wire cooling racks. The loaves are dark golden brown, dusted with flour, looking like rustic stones. November 18th, 1912. Now begins the song of the bread. As the hot loaves meet the cooler air of the bakery, the crust begins to contract and crack. I leaned in close to listen. Snap, crackle, pop. It is a faint, microscopic sound, like tiny twigs breaking. The bread is settling. This sound is the reward for all the hard work. I stood there for minutes, just listening to the choir of 20 cooling loaves. It is a sound of comfort, a sound that promises nourishment. November 19th, 1912. The cinnamon buns are ready for glazing. They came out bubbling and sticky. I prepared a simple glaze of icing sugar and milk in a small bowl. It is thick and white. I dipped a brush into the glaze and painted it over the hot buns. Swish, drip. The glaze melted instantly upon contact, running into the spirals and crevices. It sizzled slightly on the hot pan. The smell of hot sugar and cinnamon is overwhelming now, sweet and spicy. They glistened under the lamplight, sticky and inviting. November 20th, 1912. Wednesday. Preparation for the morning delivery. I brought out the large wicker baskets. They are old and creaky. Creak, rustle. I lined them with checkered red and white cloths. I began to stack the baguettes standing up in the basket. The crusts rubbed against each other with a dry, scratching sound. Scratch, scratch. I covered them with another heavy cloth to keep them warm. The baskets smell of willow wood and fresh bread. They are heavy now, ready for the boy who runs the deliveries. November 21st, 1912. I treated myself to a baker's breakfast. I took a small, misshapen roll that wouldn't sell. I tore it open with my hands. The steam escaped in a soft puff. The inside was soft and airy, the crust shattered like glass. I spread a thick layer of salted butter on the hot crumb. It melted into golden pools. I took a bite. Crunch. The contrast between the crisp crust and the soft, chewy interior is perfect. I ate in silence, standing by the warm oven. It is the best meal of the day. November 22nd, 1912. Friday. The sun is beginning to hint at the horizon. The window panes are turning from black to deep blue. I started to arrange the display window. I placed the cinnamon buns on a ceramic platter in the front. I stacked the rustic loaves in a pyramid on the wooden shelf. I want the first people walking by to see abundance. I wiped the condensation from the glass with a rag. Squeak, squeak. The village is waking up. I can hear the distant clip-clop of a milk wagon horse on the cobblestones. November 23rd, 1912. Saturday. The week is almost over. I swept the floor one last time before opening. The flour dust settles quickly. I untied my apron and shook it out the back door. A cloud of white puffed into the cold morning air. I washed my hands in the stone basin. The water was cold. I looked at my hands, red from the heat, dusted with flour, strong. They have fed the village for another week. I walked to the front door and unlocked it. Click. I flipped the sign to open. The bell above the door jingled as the first customer pushed it open. November 23rd, 1912. Evening. The Saturday rush is over. The shelves are bare, save for a few crumbs. It is a good feeling, seeing the empty wood where mounds of bread once stood. I locked the front door and pulled the blind down. Snap. The shop is quiet again. I opened the wooden till drawer. It is heavy with copper pennies and silver sixpences. I began to count them into stacks. Clink, clink, clink. The sound of the coins is sharp against the silence. It is the sound of hard work turned into sustenance. I placed the coins into a canvas bag and tied it with a leather thong. November 24th, 1912. Sunday. The bakery is closed, but a baker never truly leaves his kitchen. I came in not to bake, but to care for the wood. The large work table is thirsty. I took a tin of beeswax and mineral oil. Using a soft rag, I scooped up the paste and began to rub it into the grain of the table. Rub, swish, rub. The dry wood drank in the oil, turning a deep, rich honey color. The friction warmed the wax, releasing a scent of bees and summer flowers. It is a slow, circular motion. I polished until my reflection was hazy in the wood. November 25th, 1912. I attended to the wooden peels today. The edges get rough from sliding against the brick oven floor. I used a piece of fine sandpaper to smooth them down. Scritch, scratch, scritch. It is a dry, gritty sound. I worked until the edge was as smooth as glass. A splinter could ruin a loaf, so the tools must be perfect. I wiped away the sawdust with my hand. Then I hung the peels back on their hooks on the wall. Clack, clack. They hang there like oars of a boat, waiting for the next tide. November 26th, 1912. Tuesday. A delivery of spices arrived for the holiday cakes. Small glass jars of nutmeg, cloves, and dried ginger. I arranged them on the shelf above the mixing station. I opened the jar of cloves just to smell it. The scent is sharp, warm, and peppery. It tickles the nose. I tapped the glass jar against the wood to settle the contents. Tap, tap. The pantry is beginning to smell like Christmas. I checked the level of the molasses barrel. It is full, the dark, thick syrup waiting to be poured. November 27th, 1912. I spent the afternoon sifting the leftover flour from the bins. Sometimes hard lumps form at the bottom. I passed everything through the fine brass mesh sieve again. Shh, sift, shh. The rhythm is hypnotic. The clean, aerated flour piled up in the bin, soft and white. I love the silence of flour. It muffles sound. It absorbs noise. The bakery feels padded and insulated from the cold world outside. I dusted my hands on my apron, leaving white, ghostly handprints. November 28th, 1912. Thursday. The fire needs wood. I went out to the woodshed in the backyard. The air was biting cold. I gathered an armful of birch logs. The bark is white and papery, peeling off in strips. I carried them inside, stacking them next to the oven. Thud, thud, thud. The wood smells of the forest, damp and earthy. I like knowing the fuel is there, ready. A baker is nothing without his fire. I swept the bits of bark from the floor, the bristles of the broom hissing against the stone tiles. November 29th, 1912. Friday. I sat by the cooling oven for a long time this evening. The heat is gentle now, fading slowly. I watched the dust motes dancing in the shaft of light from the window. The bakery is waiting. The yeast is bubbling quietly in its jar. The flour is sifted. The wood is stacked. There is a profound peace in being prepared. I feel the tiredness in my shoulders, a good tiredness. I rested my head in my hands and just listened to the silence of the room. November 30th, 1912. Saturday night. The month draws to a close. The air outside has turned bitter, carrying the first flakes of December snow. Inside, I am preparing the mother dough for tomorrow. I took a small piece of raw dough saved from the last batch and buried it deep in the flour bin. It will sleep there, preserved and safe, ready to give life to the next loaf. It is a continuous chain, unbroken for years. I covered the bin with the heavy wooden lid. Thump. The sound seals the pact for another day. December 1st, 1912. Sunday, the first day of winter. I arrived early to light the oven. The cold drafts sneak in under the door, but the oven defeats them. I fed the fire with extra oak logs today. The flames roared up the chimney, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I stood with my back to the fire, letting the heat soak into my coat. The bakery is a fortress against the cold. Here it is always summer. Here there is always food. I checked the temperature gauge. The needle climbed steadily. The heart of the bakery is beating strong. December 2nd, 1912. I spent the quiet hours of the morning simply watching the flour dust settle. In the shaft of sunlight cutting through the gloom, the dust looks like gold. It covers everything in a soft silence. I ran my finger along the edge of the work table. Swipe. A clean line in the dust. We are like this flour, drifting, settling, rising. I wiped my hands on my apron. The work is never truly done, but for now it is enough. The shelves are ready. The village will be fed. December 3rd, the final task. I took the oil lamp and walked around the shop one last time. I checked the windows, latched. I checked the back door, bolted. The yeast bubbles quietly in its corner. The wood is stacked high. The smell of the bakery is a complex perfume of toasted grain, wood smoke, and patience. I blew out the lamp. Huff! The flame vanished, leaving only the soft red glow of the oven embers in the darkness. It is a comforting darkness. Outro. Slow and fading. The baker hangs up his apron. The fire glows softly, watching over the rising dough in the dark. The world outside is cold and asleep, but inside everything is warm and safe. You are here in the warmth of the hearth. Rest now. The bread will rise again tomorrow. Sleep well.